Hello everybody, and welcome to pre-show for Monster Monday. This is Monster Monday for December 27th, 2021, the last Monster Monday of 2021. Looking forward to yet another year of Monster Monday and all kinds of new fun D&D content coming up next year here on the channel. Tonight, we're going to be looking at an oldie but goodie. But until then, sit back and relax to the dulcet strains of Syrinscape. This is fast becoming one of my favorite Syrinscape sound sets, just sort of for general background. This is the Friendly Tavern, and this is a particular title within that sound set called More Music. So it's got the musicians playing for their mead, the sounds of the fire in the background, slight murmur of patrons talking in the tavern, as well as the clink of mugs and things like that. And then there's some occasional sound effects you'll hear. Like you'll hear some people laughing over in the background, and occasionally you just might hear a patron that's had a little bit too much to drink. Yes. Okay, so it's a really cool kind of sound set. They have all kinds of things, incidental music, ambient sounds, great for everything from battles to exploration to just times when your players are RPing a scene. You can find something to go in the background behind that and just keep there from being completely dead air within your streams. So that's kind of cool. All right. Also, please always remember to go check out our friends over at the Tabletop Bellhop. Mo over there at Tabletop Bellhop. He is the OG when it comes to all things tabletop games. Card games, board games, party games, tabletop RPGs, you name it. If you can play it on a tabletop, then Mo has all kinds of information about it at the Tabletop Bellhop, including an entire galaxy of creators who are creating content, podcasts, live streams, YouTube videos, publication articles, periodicals, everything on all aspects of tabletop gaming, from game studios and game developers and designers to new releases and reviews to deep dives on rule discussions to actual play. So tons of stuff over there. Go check out Mo at the Tabletop Bellhop. Alright, and we will get started here at the top of the hour. I am just fixing my hot tea. I love this time of the year because it means that I can have hot tea throughout the day. Normally here in Florida, you get much past March and up until October, November, you can have hot tea in the morning. But it's too hot to have a hot drink during the day. You want to just have cold drinks the rest of the day. And iced tea is fine. I like iced tea, but it's like hot tea, especially if you're having to do a lot of talking or things like that. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and mute while I take a little sip of this so you don't hear me slurping. Alright, and we are going to bring the music down here, and we are going to go find a little quiet corner near the fire. That's what we're going to do. So then we're going to come on back over here, and we will say welcome Welcome everybody to Monster Monday for December 27th, 2021. I am your host, DM Gallibond, and tonight on Monster Monday we are going to be looking at an oldie but a goodie. We're going to be looking at a monster that goes all the way back to the very first original editions of D&D, called the Black Pudding. Black Pudding has been around forever, and it's got kind of surprising origins of the reasons that it was put into the game, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I am DM Gallibond. If you're watching on the Twitch, please follow or subscribe to the channel over there on Twitch. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, and click the post notification bell so that you get notified every time new content drops on this channel. Alright, and the sounds in the background, of course, as always, provided by Syrinscape. Okay, tonight's monster we're going to look at is the Black Pudding, and as usual, we always start off with a description of the Black Pudding. And we look at those from the earliest edition of the game all the way to the current edition. So the Black Pudding is a non-intelligent black blob, 5 to 30 feet in diameter. Puddings are always hungry. They will attack any creature they come across, and that is from basic D&D. Now, there wasn't a description in the original rules, and there wasn't a description in first edition or AD&D, but in second edition, we got another description, and that is, puddings are voracious, pudding-like monsters composed of groups of cell colonies that scavenge and hunt for food. So they were actually, in second edition, they were actually trying to kind of make semi-biological sounding excuses or reasons for these monsters to exist. Alright, and then in third edition, we got a really colorful description. This creature resembles nothing so much as a roundish blob of inky black goo. It's just a big blob of goo is what it is. And this image here is the image from the first edition monster manual. So as you can see here, the Black Pudding is kind of on this slope in this cave, which gives you a little bit of an idea of where it might be found. These are usually not found outside. They're either in caves, in dungeons, or in ruins. Alright, now this is an image of the Black Pudding from 2nd edition D&D. So, Black Pudding lore, we take a look at Black Pudding from the current edition, and we look backwards to see what we learn about Black Puddings there. So, according to the Demonomicon of Igawilv and other resources, oozes are scattered fragments or offspring of the demon lord Jubilex. Now, whether that's true or not, the Faceless Lord, which is another name for Jubilex, is one of the few beings that can control oozes and imbues them with a modicum of intelligence from time to time. Okay? That is going to be an important clue for when we're talking about how we can place these in a campaign and how we might choose to use them. Alright, Black Pudding has no discernible tactics, seeking only to eat the closest targets. It has no sense of self-preservation. That's what we learn from 4th edition. And all the way back to original D&D, we learn Black Puddings are not affected by cold. It is spread into smaller ones by chops or lightning bolts, but is killed by fire. Now, that's kind of a weird way of them saying that, but what that means is if you hit it with an edged weapon or if you strike it with a lightning bolt, you're just going to wind up with multiple Black Puddings. So you'll turn one Black Pudding into two, turn each of those two into two more, and so on and so forth and whatnot. Black Puddings dissolve wood, corrode metal at a reasonably fast rate, have no effect on stone, and cause 3 dice of damage to exposed flesh. And the reason they say 3 dice of damage is that in original D&D, every monster did d6 damage. And almost every attack from any monster was 1d6 damage. And oh boy, if you ever had a monster that did 2 dice or 3 dice of damage, that was a really tough monster. So you can see way back then, they were thinking, oh, 3 dice of damage. This is a really tough monster. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that has evolved over time as well. Now in 5th edition D&D, the creature type is an ooze. All creatures have a type, and oozes all have properties, just like every family of creatures has a property. Properties of oozes: they are gelatinous creatures that rarely have a fixed shape. They are mostly subterranean, dwelling in caves and dungeons, and feeding on refuse, carrion, or creatures unlucky enough to get in their way. Black puddings and gelatinous cubes are among the most recognizable oozes. So they collect in underground areas, and if you've ever had the situation like maybe when you were younger, if the house where you grew up or the apartments where you grew up had a garage or something like that, and you remember that when the family car would be out, you would go out and there would be like this little slick of oil underneath, where the engine block of the car was, because all the way up until the 1970s, 1980s, cars just would always have like some kind of little pressure leak or something like that, and that stuff would all sort of gloop down on the bottom of the engine while it was running, and then when you stopped, it would slowly drip onto the ground, and so it would always collect where you parked the car. And so that's kind of the one of the ways they think about these oozes is all this stuff that just sort of collects down in the bottom of the dungeon or in the bottom of caves or things like that. All right, now we're going to take a look at the mechanical features of the black pudding through the ages. And in order to do that, we are going to go over to our source books. And this source book that we are looking at, this is from the original D&D. This is the 1974 rulebook. And this is when Dungeons and Dragons first appeared as a named game, different than the game Chainmail, which was something else that had been developed. This was the original Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson rule set. So you can see that we have the black pudding. One of these always appears. It has a movement or an armor class of 6. It has a movement of 6, and it says movement in inches is 6. It's because they envisioned everything being played on a table that had 1-inch grids, so it could move 6 of those grid spaces in a turn. And 10 hit dice, which meant it was a very tough monster, because not many things have 10 hit dice. You see, even things like griffins only have 7 hit dice, and rocks, these big giant birds, only have 6, and treants only have 8. So these big huge walking trees have 8, but a black pudding has 10. So that's a lot of hit dice for something back in those days. And no treasure, and no chance. It doesn't have a lair, so there's no chance for it to be in its lair. All right, and then from the same resource, a few pages later, we have a description of the black pudding, and it gives us an idea of why this monster exists. Okay, it says it's another member of the cleanup crew, and it's a nuisance monster. Black puddings aren't affected by cold, spread into smaller ones by chops or lightning bolts, but killed by fire. They dissolve wood, corrode metal, no effect on stone, do 3 dice of damage. If an armed character runs through a black pudding, the monster's corrosive power will eat away the foot and leg protection of the armor, so that it will fall away the next turn. Black puddings can pass through fairly small openings, and they can travel as easily on ceilings as on floors. So, yes, the entire reason that monsters like the ochre jelly, the black pudding, the green slime, the gray ooze, and later on the gelatinous cube, They were all put into the game to explain why, when your adventurers walk into a dungeon, this dungeon has been here for 100 years. Why isn't it all dusty and, all kinds of cobwebs and skeletons of little animals like rats and spiders and all that kind of crap? Why isn't that all here? Well, it's because there's these monsters that are oozes that go through the dungeon, and they eat both living material, and they eat all of the remnants of everything that came through. So that adventuring party that came through last year, they're long gone. Their bodies are gone, their weapons are gone, their armor's gone, and there's no sign of them because the black puddings have just gone through and dissolved everything. And so now it leaves a nice, sparkling, clean dungeon for your party to go and follow. So it's it's like they decided, oh, okay, yeah, that's why we need a monster that kind of acts like a garbage disposal, and so that's why we're going to put these oozes and slimes into the game, and all of them dissolve different types of things, and most of them don't dissolve stone, which is why they leave the dungeon nice and clean. All right, then moving forward to the basic edition of the game, which is probably the first widespread edition. Kind of like, it's interesting with the two IPs that Wizards of the Coast now owns. If you look at the really super rare cards for Magic the Gathering, those are from the alpha and the beta, and they were very small releases, and they were basically like trialing the product to see if people would like the game and see if it would take off. And that's why if you look at things like the Alpha Black Lotus or even some other things, some of those cards could go for tens of thousands of dollars just because there were so few of them printed originally, and there's hardly ever any of them that come up for sale in the third-party market. So they become extremely valuable and fetch very high prices. But as soon as you hit the revised edition, that was the widespread early adopters of the game, like myself and my friends, who jumped into the game as early as 1993. We were playing this game before the end of the year of 1993. That was the year that Alpha was released. But we didn't have access to alpha cards. That was also the year that beta was released. We didn't have access to beta cards. Revised edition was the first edition that was largely available nationwide, and we got a hold of some revised cards, and that's when we started playing the game. So the same thing with Dungeons and Dragons. The original edition that we were looking at before, that was a very limited release, kind of released into the hobbyists that had been into the tabletop miniature war games, which is sort of the whole community that Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax came out of, which was a lot of building miniature armies that were historical reenactments of everything from the Huns and the Greco-Roman armies all the way like to the Napoleonic armies in the U.S. Civil War and those types of things. And they would build all these dioramas and big tables that would represent the geography. And then they had all these rules for how your units of soldiers would move, and dice rolls would be part of determining how whether your attack succeeded or not and whatnot. Those rules all got eventually ported over to create the game that we now know as Dungeons and Dragons, and putting a fantasy spin on that whole wargaming type of thing. So the Black Pudding in Basic Edition was the first widespread edition of the game. It had an armor class of 6, which is the same, 10 hit dice, which is the same, a 60-foot movement in out of combat, but a 20-foot movement in combat, 3d8 damage. So a lot of the same elements from the original version of the game we're here. And it is okay, so they can only be killed by fire. Other attacks, weapons, and spells merely break it up into smaller puddings, each with 2 hit dice and inflicting 1d8 points of damage per blow. However, a flaming sword will cause full normal damage. And so they have that is the black pudding from Basic Edition. Now in First Edition or AD&D, like once again, armor class 6, hit die 10, number of attacks 1, 3d8. Special attacks, they dissolve wood and metal. Special defenses, blows, cold, and lightning do no harm. And so the only way of killing it is by burning it. And so their monster composed of groups of single cells. Hunter-gatherer or hunter-scavenger underground areas. Tiny mouths and saliva do 3d8 points of damage to exposed flesh. Monster needs to dissolve wood in order to obtain food. It can eat away about 2-inch thickness of wood in 1 melee round. So black puddings also eat away metal with their corrosive saliva. Chainmail in 1 round, plate mail in 2 rounds. Additional melee round for magical armor at a rate of 1 melee round for each plus of armor. So +1 plate mail armor would be in contact with a pudding for 3 rounds before it's dissolved. And if chopped or struck, it's broken into 2 or more parts, each capable of attack. Same is true if attacked by lightning. So now note that even the small size are able to deliver the normal damage. So that's an important difference. They said from basic to first edition, well, even if you cut it up into smaller pieces, each of those is going to do the same 3d8 damage. And the reasoning behind that is that the larger puddings aren't able to use all of their mouth openings to attack a target. So you're still getting attacked by the same amount of black pudding saliva and black pudding mouths, whether you're being attacked by a small pudding or a large pudding. That was in first edition. All right, so then in second edition, armor class 6, movement of 6, hit die 10, 3d8 damage, and pretty much all of the same thing. So we'll see, this is one of those monsters that, unlike many monsters, it doesn't change much over the editions. It's very, very consistent, extremely consistent in its in what it does. So now third edition is where all of the things like the armor class flips and some of the other things flip, challenge ratings come into play. So it's now a 10d10 plus 60 monster, so it's 115 points. Speed is 20 feet. Armor class is 3. And it has special attacks of acid and constriction. So now not only will it dissolve, but it will also grapple and it will squeeze and do physical damage from its squeezing. And it has the pseudopods that it will use to reach out and slam into enemies. So that is an important difference there. But otherwise, in terms of its vulnerabilities and everything, it is pretty much the same. You have to burn it in order to kill it. Now, in third edition, we learn about 2 different special puddings. Okay. There's 2 sources that they put out in third edition that I think are really cool for your library as a DM. One is called Fiendish Codex 1 Hordes of the Abyss. And this is a deep dive resource on all of the demonic fiends, so all of the demons that are in the Abyss. And there's one that talks about Jubilex here. And there's this one little phrase here, and it's not ever detailed, but it's a great thing that you can go and pluck out if you have any kind of campaign that touches on dealing with incursions by demons, or your party having to go to the abyss and battle against demons. So there's no organized cult of Jubilex. Doubtful of Jubilex knows of any of these, doesn't encourage them or reward loyalty. His primary minions are the countless slimes, oozes, and jellies that shudder in the depths of his realm. Of these, only one is intelligent enough to serve the Faceless Lord willingly. A unique, demonic black pudding known as Darkness Given Hunger. A named black pudding that serves the demon lord Jubilex. Oh, if your party ever gets in the crosshairs of Jubilex enough that he gets ticked off, maybe Darkness Given Hunger will come after them. I wonder what that monster would be like. Unfortunately, they don't give us a stat block. And I don't know if that's not unfortunate or not. It might be very fortunate because that means as a DM, you get to decide what its stat block is, how big it is, how menacing it is, how intelligent it is. All right, and another place we hear about is in the second Fiendish Codex. The Fiendish Codex 2, Tyrants of the Nine Hells. So this is all about the areas of the Nine Hells and the devils that live there. But they talk about the different regions of the Nine Hells, and one of these regions is a region called Maladomini. And Maladomini has these rivers of flowing sludge. And these rivers are so polluted and so foul that they give spontaneous birth to a wide range of fiendish oozes, including black puddings, gelatinous cubes, and ochre jellies. So now, we talked about if your party had to go to the abyss, might run into Darkness Given Hunger. If you have to go to the Nine Hells, what about having to go and having to try to find a way across, the rivers of Maladominia, or Maladomini? If you have to cross those rivers might just, spawn a black ooze underneath the boat that you're going in, and then it suddenly starts to dissolve your boat. Now your party has a really interesting conundrum on their hands. So it's just kind of a fun way, very situational, of course. But I just wanted to point out that there were some very interesting things with black puddings in those particular resources. All right, then in 4th edition, black puddings, of course, they're different than they are in any other edition. Black pudding is a level 8 elite brute, AC of 20, 163 hit points, resist 15 acid, and now that's another really interesting thing in 4th edition. I don't think there's hardly any monsters that are completely immune to any kind of thing, but ones that use a particular type of attack, like black puddings use an acid attack, they tend to have a huge resistance to that kind of damage. So they engulf, mercurial body, they split when hit by a weapon attack, and whatnot. And then there's black pudding spawn that are minions, so those are like the little splatters of black puddings. It's the same level, but just 1 hit point instead of 163 hit points. And then finally we come to 5th edition, the modern edition of the game, and black puddings have an armor class of 7. Yeah, they're very slow, and they're rather large, so they're easy to hit. But just remember, you hit them with weapons that are non-magical, they're destroyed after dealing damage. So, yeah, it's easy to hit them, but you're going to lose the weapon when you do that, especially if it's a non-magical weapon. Now, in 5e, they make a special note here to talk about non-magical weapons. So a creature that touches the pudding or hits it with a melee attack within 5 feet takes 4 acid damage. A non-magical weapon made of metal or wood that hits the pudding corrodes. After dealing damage, the weapon takes a permanent and cumulative -1 penalty to damage rolls. If its penalty drops to -5, the weapon is destroyed. And the pudding can eat through a 2-inch block, 2-inch thick non-magical wood or metal in 1 round. Now, they make a point here in 5e of talking about non-magical weapons. You remember in one of the earlier editions, it talked about if you have magical weapons or magical armor, it will corrode those and remove 1+ per round. Now, just because there's a rule book that tells you something in 5e doesn't mean as a DM you have to follow that. If you like the idea that it will outright destroy non-magical weapons, and it will also corrode and damage magical weapons and armor, at your table, you are free to make that table rule, that it can do that. It's a really nice way of giving your party kind of more limitations on what they can do, making them think, what other options do we have? How can we destroy this monster? Because we all know hacking at it isn't going to do any good anyway. And if you hack at it with your nice nifty magic sword and it's going to corrode your magic sword, well, you probably don't want to use your magic sword on it. So, yeah, what can we do? Oh, hey, yeah, fire destroys it. Well, let's just light a torch and throw a torch on it. Make them think about different ways of tackling your monster instead of just running in and whacking it like they always do. All right, so the actions are pseudopod attack. Its reactions is split when it's subjected to lightning or slashing damage. It splits into 2 new puddings, and then there's each new pudding has hit points equal to half the original puddings rounded down, 1 size smaller. But notice they do the same kind of damage, because just like the early edition said, when the larger ones can't use all of their malice to attack. Same here in 5e. All right, so that is a history of the mechanics of the monster. Now let's go back and let's take a look at some of the other ways we might encounter and use this monster. Okay, so as a DM, if you want to use black puddings in encounters, how could you create a hard encounter with these creatures for a party of 5 PCs? In 5th edition, the standard black pudding is a CR4 monster. For a level 2 party, that is a hard encounter. Now, technically, it ticks just over the line, and the encounter generator will tell you it's a deadly encounter, but all but your least tactical and your most inexperienced players can figure out ways of dealing with monsters that are just beyond what they are supposed to be able to do. The ratings for the challenge in 5e are a little forgiving. So when something is just on the threshold of being deadly, it's probably really a hard encounter for most parties. There's some parties, some inexperienced players, maybe some very young players that don't have any ideas of how to do tactics or things like that. They may wind up getting killed more easily by deadly encounters. But for a party of most average players, a just on the threshold of deadly encounter will be a reasonable encounter. You don't want to throw every encounter like that, but so at level 2 you can begin using these against your party. Now at level 3 it's a medium encounter. If you want to turn it into a hard encounter, you can have in the same area, you can have both a black pudding and a gray ooze. Those two together would constitute a hard encounter for a 3rd level party. And if you have a party of 4th level adventurers, you would want to add a gelatinous cube. That would make the encounter a hard encounter. Because for a level 4 party, a single black pudding would just be an easy encounter. Alright, now, if you are a player and you encounter a black pudding, what are some tactics you can use? Okay, so number 1, don't touch it. Flesh, wood, metal, and bone dissolve when the pudding ebbs over them. Stone remains behind, wiped clean. You're going to die a slow death. Black puddings engulf creatures to prevent their escape. It's a painful and agonizing death, but it does allow clever allies time to help an engulfed creature escape before they are fully slain. And living traps. Although an ooze lacks the intelligence to ally itself with other creatures, others that understand an ooze's need to feed might lure it into a location where it can be of use to them. Clever monsters keep oozes around to defend passageways or consume refuse. Likewise, an ooze can be enticed into a pit trap where its captors feed it often enough to prevent it from coming after them. And crafty creatures place torches and flaming braziers in strategic areas to dissuade an ooze from leaving a particular tunnel or room. So that is, you might, if you're walking along in an area and you suddenly get to a part of the dungeon where the DM makes note of, hey, all those little husks of dead insects and rat skeletons that you see every now and then. You don't see any of these. Everything is very pristine. And just before you got to this area, there were these big lanterns with fire in them. Wonder what's up with that. That might be a clue that, hey, maybe some kind of ooze is around. We might want to watch out for a black pudding or monsters like it. Another thing, of course, is use fire. Use fire. Put a flaming arrow and shoot that into the thing and burn it, or pour some oil on it and throw a torch on it and burn it that way. That would be advice to your players. All right, as a DM, some tactics for using these. We already talked about the fact they were originally introduced as a living way of cleaning the dungeon hallways. In an old-fashioned dungeon crawl where the party has encountered pools of puddles of harmless liquid before, you might decide that the next pool of liquid is not a pool of liquid at all. It's a black pudding. So now they've probably the first couple of times they got close, maybe they stuck the end of a staff in it. Okay, staff got wet. All right, you found 2 or 3 of those. Now it's just another puddle. And then they go and they step in it. This one is the black pudding. So that can be a nasty surprise for an unwary party. Alternately, black puddings can make traps even more deadly. So, as they talked about on the previous slide, the clever dungeon designer threw a black pudding down into the bottom of the 20-foot pit trap. So you fall into the pit, and you don't land on spikes, but you land on this goo. And now the goo starts dissolving you. Okay. And remember, metal weapons and armor will be dissolved, so you could strip low-level characters of some gear with one of these monsters if they're unwary. Your party goes through, they make all the wrong choices. They wind up getting hurt, but getting their people out. But now their armor might be ruined and the armor might be dissolved off of them. Several of them might have lost weapons because they tried to attack it with weapons and now those are useless and dissolved away. All of those kinds of things. So you can use that as a DM to sort of teach your players of a D&D life lesson in terms of, okay, think strategically, learn how to, think about different options. Don't always attack every monster the same way because it doesn't work out that well. Okay, and where can you place black puddings in campaigns? So normally the black pudding's a monster for a low-level dungeon. When parties start to gain magic items that can help them fly, the boots of flying is like, I think in every 5th edition campaign that I have run, as soon as parties hit 5th level, there's always at least one, and most of the time more than one party member that's like, I want to go somewhere and find boots of flying. And that's kind of their thing, because there's different things you can do with boots of flying. Now, sometimes it helps you out and sometimes it doesn't. But in a low-level dungeon where if you just want to fly maybe a foot off the ground and avoid any of those puddles, well, okay, so that takes care of avoiding some of those black puddings. And then obviously when the party gets high enough level that they have access to teleportation magic to escape being grappled, these monsters become much less fearsome. Yes, they'll hurt you, but you can usually get away very quickly. Now, as an alternate, you can remember back to those 3E Fiendish variants. There's the Sentient Black Pudding, Darkness Given Hunger. There's the Sludge Rivers of Maladominion that spontaneously generates ooze monsters, including black puddings. So creating a black pudding the size of a lake or a sentient black pudding as an adversary for your campaign can be extremely deadly to even much higher level parties. For those people whose certain cultural IPs do a crossover similar to mine, you may remember back to the early years of Star Trek Next Generation and the character of Tasha Yar. And I can't remember whether it was in the first season or whether it was sometime in the second season, but the actress wanted kind of out of the show, so they wrote her out, and the way they killed her was they had this big ooze monster that came out from a puddle of like oil and grabbed her and pulled her under and dissolved her. And so, it's kind of like, hey, those guys were playing D&D. They got that idea from a black pudding. So you can then go and have the big bad in your dungeon be an intelligent black pudding that maybe lures adventurers to their doom through some of the things, and maybe taunts them, and they don't realize it's a black pudding until they get to the final boss monster confrontation. And then, of course, there's another reason to use this monster is anytime you want to sing the Black Pudding song. Wait, you haven't heard of the Black Pudding song? Oh, as a DM, you haven't lived until you've broken out the Black Pudding song for your players. Want to know how it goes? Sure you do. All right, so here's the Black Pudding song. Oh, black pudding, blam-a-lam, oh, black pudding, blam-a-lam, black pudding on your boots, blam-a-lam, gonna give you the blues, blam-a-lam, black pudding on your leg, blam-a-lam, gonna make you beg, blam-a-lam, oh, black pudding, blam-a-lam, oh, black pudding, blam-a-lam, black pudding on your arm, blam-a-lam, gonna do you harm, blam-a-lam, black pudding on your head, blam-a-lam, you're gonna soon be dead, blam-a-lam, oh, black pudding, blam-a-lam, oh, black pudding, blam-a-lam, oh, black pudding, blam-a-lam, oh, black pudding, blam-a-lam. All right, so yes, the anytime you want to break out that song for your players, you can always throw a black pudding in their path in the dungeon. All right, and now, as we always do, we kind of are going to put our thinking caps on and talk a little bit about how we could reskin this monster, how we could make it something unique and different that is not strictly speaking in the rule book, but gives your players a unique encounter with a black pudding in your game. So I can think of a couple of ways right off the top of my head, and by using a few minutes, you could probably think of a few more different ways you could reskin this monster. So one way would be to give black puddings the ability to form into functional monster shapes that would give it other forms of mobility. So imagine a black pudding that can form into a swarm of bat-like creatures and can fly into your PCs. And when they hit, they just splatter and start to spread out on them and engulf them as they splatter. Or perhaps a black pudding could become like a school of fish or a single huge fish like a shark and could swim after underwater PCs. Or maybe a black pudding could form into a bipedal or quadrupedal shape and run after the party members, leaping on them and engulfing them. So another way to change the black pudding around is to change what they dissolve. So imagine a less deadly, but perhaps a more humorous form of the black pudding that dissolves everything like normal black puddings, except for flesh. So perhaps its diet is metal, cloth, leather, and wood, and it just might leave your PCs without any armor or any weapons. So maybe they are in the dungeon and they're supposed to be keeping watches, and one of the guys or one of the party members falls asleep on the watch, fails their perception check. Okay, then everybody wakes up in the morning. Their bedrolls are gone, their armor's gone, their weapons are gone, their backpacks are gone, everything else is gone, except the fire pit is there with the embers burning down in the fire. And they are there. No clothes, no armor, no weapons, no nothing. What the hell happened? Well, the black pudding came through and said, "Ooh, lunch!" And now you've got a bunch of PCs with no weapons, no armor, and having to figure out how they're going to get out of there without getting run through town for violating decency laws. So that could be a humorous way of using a black pudding in a campaign. Okay, and now let me go back over to the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat. I am going to go into the wrap-up, and then I will come back to the chat and see if there are any questions then. I have been DM Gallibond. This has been our show, Monster Monday on the Black Pudding. Thank you guys all for following the show through the years that we've been doing it, and we hope that we will see more and more of you in the years to come. My other shows that we do, 3 actual play D&D sessions every week. Our Sunday afternoon game is 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It's our 5th edition Planeswalking game where we cross the streams between Magic the Gathering and D&D 5e. Then on Thursday evenings at 8 p.m. we do our Sword Coast Chronicles game. That is a 5th edition game where we tell a homebrew story through the lens of the 5e published campaigns. And then our Saturday Night Greyhawk game, where we are going through and exploring some of the classic dungeons using the old 2nd edition rule set. And right now we're in the middle of exploring the Temple of Elemental Evil with 2nd edition rules. So come check us out on Saturday nights for that one. You can find all of our live streams simulcast on both Twitch and on YouTube. And we would love it if you subscribe to us on YouTube, like the videos, share the videos, click the post notification bell so that you know when we go live or drop new content. And over on Twitch, we love it if you follow us there or subscribe to us there. And then we do have a Patreon in case you want to support more of what we do. Now, next week, we is starting a new year of Monster Monday, and so there's going to be a new focus. And the new focus in the new year is going to be looking at 5e published adventures and looking at the monsters that are in those adventures. And some of those will be brand new, unique monsters that have never appeared before. Others we're going to find they are monsters that either are inspired by old monsters and brought into 5e in a new form by the developers of the game, or they are monsters that just hadn't been introduced in any other source, and the developers of D&D said, this is a good way to bring in this monster to 5e now. And the monster we're going to look at next week is the Chaos Quadrupod. And the Chaos Quadrupod, we're going to start the year with probably some pretty humorous monsters, because the first one we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at the Acquisitions Incorporated sourcebook and the 5e monsters that came out of that we have not yet covered in Monster Monday before. So join us next week for that. All right, and I'm going to look and see. Okay, there's no questions. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and bring us back to the music over here. And I will just remind you all that you can find us every Monday. Hope you will be back next week. Hope we will see you then. Take care, everybody. Good night, and watch out for the monsters under the bed. Take care, everyone.